Sister Claire, are things crowded at Taizé this month?
I mean, for Tuesday, no, it's not crowded, but I mean, there's people. And yeah, I mean, all of kind of the normal kind of programs are open. There's a bit of, you know, some families, there's adults, there's quite a few, actually, there's a lot of adults because we're not putting limits on that. So there's actually more adults than young people.
So there are
Yeah.
hundreds instead of thousands?
Basically, yeah, I think this week we're at 500, 600, something like that. And the busiest weeks this summer look like they're going to be 800, 900.
Okay.
I mean, it's yeah. So actually, somewhere it's kind of nice. I mean, it's a bit of a slower pace. Like you don't, it's not you just one person after another. You actually have a bit more time with people. Yeah.
So to include everybody else in the conversation, Sister Claire is part of a community of sisters that live in a little village next to Taizé, where Taizé usually has this time of year, what, 6,000, 5,000, 6,000?
I don't know. I'm not getting any sound.
3 to 5,000.
Rabbi's talking.
Okay. All right. Please remember that if you are speaking, to mute yourself.
Unmute.
We'll give it a little bit more time. I've just put the text for today in the chat box. We have some new people who have reached us through the Hub, which is a list of online activities put together by My Jewish Learning. And so we want to welcome, we welcomed Nancy yesterday already, and I see we've got, I see we have a 951 phone number. I don't know who that is. Deb, whoever you are, welcome. And wherever you are.
I'm in Idlewild.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
That's me.
All right. Okay, good. Good. All right. All right. There's some others that have signed up. We'll see if they come on or not. We are, I think that today we're going to finish up the Samson saga, or the saga, yeah, the tales of Samson, a number of different stories, folk tales that have been put together, or woven together into one, about this very strange character from a biblical point of view. Maybe not so strange when it comes to world literature, especially when we think of the mythologies of different areas around the world. And but the lesson, if we get to the end of the story today, the lesson will be learned. Until now, all we have, I remind you, because we took a break for a few weeks, all we have really is an immature man-child of great strength who delights in stumping others. Even, you know, remember the chida, the riddle that he asked that nobody could possibly guess. I entitled the first two, or not the first two, the second and the third meetings that we have, anger management. Well, we're going to have some anger management today as well, but we've been, we mentioned the fact that Samson has a lot to do with women. And we even saw in the Midrash, and I think in our first meeting, something from Bamidbar Rabbah, which said, if you think that he was misbehaving this way, you should have seen what would have happened had he been drinking wine as well. We did notice that although he was commanded, or his mother was commanded for him to be a Nazir, a Nazirite, he wasn't so careful about becoming impure. He became impure with the carcass of the lion, killing the lion, killing other human beings. That's a source of impurity, and we'll see some of that today. While it doesn't say specifically he was drinking wine and boozing it up, he was certainly at a lot of parties, wasn't he? There were a lot of parties involved, and he just seems to be that kind of a guy. Now, a Nazir, unlike, say, in some or many traditions of many monastic traditions, celibacy is not one of the things of the Nazirite, right? Celibacy is not expected. It's just being wary of drinking anything that has to do with from grape products, or maybe one could expand that to alcohol in ancient times, although it only says grape products. Not cutting one's hair and staying away from impurity. There's nothing about staying away from intimate relations, sexual relations. And
Right
so we've already seen how Samson saw the woman, said to his mother and father, I want her, I want that one, right? He went to her once and then he came back. We had that was the second story, or our third meeting. He came back. So that's actually not, it's one woman, but it's two encounters with a woman, and both of them were problematic. And then we have today two more encounters. And if I forget to talk about the 3 and 4 model, somebody will remind me at the end. That was the topic of Yair Zakovich, my friend and teacher's PhD dissertation, which not very many people have read, I'm guessing, but I have actually. And it's a lovely, lovely expansion upon something we find in wisdom literature, the model of 3 and 4. We've seen that in other things that we've studied as well. We'll just point it out in 2 cases in today's section. Okay, before we go on, did anybody want to ask or comment about something that they had weeks to reflect upon since we last came together? If you'd like to say something, just go ahead and speak up. Unmute yourself and speak up, because I keep going to gallery, but I keep getting myself on me. Okay, anything?
Well, Rabbi, if he was supposed to stay away from things that are impurity, how did he know these women weren't impure?
Well, I'll tell you why the question is you don't even have to ask that question, because we already saw that he didn't stay away from impurity. Okay,
Right.
but yes, one might argue that by mere fact that these are not Israelite women, that they're impure. There's that kind of an attitude out there, and that's kind of, you hear that from his parents when they say, what, we don't have enough women by unsere, right, in our community. So I think the point, Eileen, is not why didn't he stay away from, but we see that doesn't seem to bother him. And this Nazarite, all that we're going to really hear about really is the hair. And maybe in that way, this is a parody of some sort, maybe even is satirical of the Nazarite, the institution, one day. In other words, he took probably the most insignificant part of it, and that became the most important part, or did it? We'll have to wait to the end of the story, because I know that none of you have read ahead. Okay, but Eileen, you have the privilege. First question, you're the first reader for us today. We're in verses 1 to 3, chapter 16, for those that don't have the sheet from a Hebrew Bible, chapter 16, 1 to 2,
Okay.
1 to 3.
Once Samson went to Gaza. There he met a whore and slept with her. The Gazites learned that Samson had come there, so they gathered and lay in ambush for him in the town gate the whole night. And all night long they kept whispering to each other, when daylight comes, we'll kill him. But Samson lay in bed only till midnight. At midnight he got up, grasped the doors of the town gate together with the 2 gateposts, and pulled them out along with the bar. He placed them on his shoulders and carried them off to the top of the hill that is near Hebron.
Okay, so this in itself is a story, right? This is there's a beginning, a middle, and an end of this story. In answer to Nancy, no, it is published. It's in Hebrew, and it was only published by a company in Israel that did PhD dissertations, or maybe it's in general. But I have a copy. If you could read modern Hebrew, I'd be happy to send it. If I could find it, could lend it to you. In any case, so we have this story, and the first thing that strikes us, of course, is that he goes to see a zonah, right? We don't think of our role models in our faith tradition to be hanging around with prostitutes, and yet it's not the first time, is it? Who's the other famous guy that went to see a prostitute?
Judah.
Judah, exactly. Now we know he didn't go see a prostitute. We know Perhaps even worse, he went to see his daughter-in-law. But we also know he was standing up for her rights, right? This is part of the biblical delight in these things, to teach us lessons in a way that the narrator knew we would be paying attention. When you say Samson is going to a prostitute, believe me, everybody drops what they're doing and they're listening, right? That's anybody who's a teacher knows that that's one way, not the only way, but that's one way to get people's attention, right? But no less so, we should probably also think of the fact of where is he going? Vayelech Shimshon Azata. He goes to Gaza, Gaza. Now, Gaza is one of 5 Philistine cities: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gat, Dagan. No, not Gat. Ashkelon, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, or Akir, Ekron, and Gaza. Dagan is not. Dagan will come afterwards. So it's those 5 cities, the coastal area you could imagine today, where Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Gaza are probably the same places. Kiryat Gat is a little bit in from there. I don't know if it was as far as that in ancient times. You know that I'm not great about biblical archaeology / geography. And Ekron is near today, south of Rehovot. That's basically the general area, and that is the coastal plain. Philistines came from the sea, but it's always a question whether they represent Canaanite culture or not. My guess is that they probably absorbed Canaanite culture, and that's going to come up now in the continuation of our story as well. So that's also, it's not just that he went to a prostitute, but he was in Gaza. Like, what's he doing in the heart of the enemy territory? Well, we had him there before with the jawbone of the ass, and the Gazans were humiliated at that little episode. That's what we did last time. If you weren't with us, then go ahead and read the previous chapter, and you'll see. So they already have a thing for him. Okay, they have a thing for him. In any case, we don't know anything about this woman, other than the fact that if beforehand he saw a woman, he said, "Oh, I want that one," and he kind of like it doesn't say he fell in love with her, but he said, "I want to marry her." So he marries her, and then he gets burned in that marriage. You remember? In this case, this is a one-night stand on purpose. This has nothing to do with love. This has to do with a physical need, but it's also something that attracts attention and something that puts him in a vulnerable position. So, for instance, Eileen, I don't know that anybody needs to ask the question, well, was she pure? Did she have a period? Had she been to the mikveh beforehand or not? If he's going to a prostitute. In other words, that's kind of like, that's way beyond, I think. Okay, so then you've got these Gazans who are they're going to get him. They heard, it says here in the beginning of the second verse, la'azatim, which means literally to the Gazans heard, or it was said to, but it's not said. You have to enter a word. A word probably fell out of the text. We're going to have a few instances today of what I've called in the past a corrupt tradition, textual tradition that we have to look towards the ancient traditions of Greek and the ancient Latin and others to kind of reconstruct the text. Well, here the Greek has, and it was said to them, to the Gazans. And then they plan an ambush, right? There's one word here, the second word in Hebrew on the second line, v'yit harshu, which people mostly, including this translation, understand it from harash, which means not hearing, or softly or whispering, which is what you have here. Another interpretation, which is Koifman, is that it probably makes much more sense to understand here that they were scheming, a less common meaning for that word, but they're scheming with each other all night long. And so you have this very humorous picture, right, of they're laying in wait, they're scheming, they were going to get him. And of course, what does he do? He bypasses them, he outsmarts them. It doesn't say how, but it doesn't really matter why. And instead of being caught between the prostitute and the gate with them in the ambush, he just picks up the whole gate. And not only does he pick it up, but he takes it a distance of 50, 60 kilometers to some jabal, to some hilltop near Hebron. Yes, Ella.
No, I meant to say Herash is secretly. They secretly.
Okay, right. Okay, that I think that's where he gets the word scheming from, or what's his name? Sojin. Sorry, quoting the wrong person. Okay, anything else before we go on? A lovely little tale of being outsmarted, right? How again, the playful child, he says, "Oh, I'll show them. I'll just pick up the whole gate." Now that we're talking about a huge piece of building here. The bottom line, I think, to the story is him saying, "You are totally unsafe. Don't even think about it. I've got even your gate. You're the only way you feel protected, right? I've got your gate, and I've taken it away." It's kind of a silly stunt to prove his point, but it's in character to everything we know so far about Samson. Any questions or comments until now?
I have one. Does this hostility toward the Philistines, does that carry on later and explain the reasons why David might have felt very compelled to kill Goliath, and more to the point, the Philistines were still angry with the Israelites because of these long-standing back and forth battles. And also, did I understand correctly that it was Samson's parents who set him apart as a Nazirite? This was not a mature decision that he made himself.
Right. So let's start with the second thing first. It's a decision that was imposed upon his parents, particularly his mother, by a person who seems to be an angel. That's in the opening scene. So go back 3 chapters. I think it's, somebody correct me, is it 13 chapter? I think it starts in 13. So go back and read that, Nancy, when we're done today, and you'll get the whole flavor of the story. She's a barren woman. His mother's a barren woman. She's visited by a heavenly being, or a supernatural being, who says, you will give birth, but you have to make sure not to touch wine, not to become impure yourself, and then also to impose that upon the child. So you're right. It was not a decision. So it's unlike the law of the Nazarite in the book of Numbers. As far
So
as
he
your
had
second thing,
he may not have actually ever bought into this scheme in a religious sense. So he didn't take a vow. His mother sort of thrust him in this role, which may explain why it seems like his greatest pleasure is in women and duping other people.
perhaps also in killing other people, but
yes.
our approach here, Nancy, as it is in the book of Numbers that you saw yesterday, is not so much looking for the history of who the person was, but trying to understand what the message of the story is. So one might walk away, as you are still walking with the message that, parents can't really impose religious beliefs and value systems on their kids, and they need to be respected, or at least that explains why should we blame him for something. Of course, that's a really interesting and long-standing issue in Jewish education, isn't it? Right? The young parents who have decided not to circumcise their son in recent years, in previous years, in earlier times, not so much now, I think it's pretty given, the young Jew who decides to marry a non-Jew, the Jew that leaves the fold, all those kinds of issues come up, and one might read that in that context. Certainly, I mean, we're always interpreting from our own life situation. As far as the original meaning of the author, let's keep that, what I propose, let's keep that to the end till we get to the end of the story. Right now, we're building up building blocks that have created an image, a character of an immature man-child, right? This strong person who is just kind of I don't want to.
Okay, I've got it. Okay, excuse me, I understand.
But no, there's nothing to it. But as far as you said, is this connected to the David and Goliath story? Well, really, I don't know if it's literarily connected. In other words, I don't know that the stories about David and the Philistines angry, if that, I don't, that they're angry about Samson, because I don't even know if Samson happened, where I probably do think that David is a historical figure. We do know historically the Philistines were in that area, and they were in a constant state of war or stress with the Israelites. And
Yes,
we'll
I
have
meant
some
it as a
stories-
literary connection. Yeah.
we'll have some stories at the end of the book of Judges that one of the stories we'll talk about that tension between the tribe of Dan, and the Philistines. Is there a literary connection? I don't know, but what would be a telltale sign of that would be, and I haven't done, would be to search for catchphrases and keywords in Hebrew of this text, and then go back to the passages in the book of Samuel about the Philistines. If we see there are common terms that are relatively rare, then that would be a really good indication that at least one of the authors or an editor at some point said, yes, we want you to make that connection.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
That's okay.
That's something,
Thank you.
but I haven't done that. So I think it's a great
Okay.
idea, something to pursue. If this was a seminar, I'd say, great, that's a great idea for a paper.
Mhm.
So you may want to think of that for the paper at the end of the term, Nancy. There are no papers, I'm just joking.
I know. That's why I'm
All right.
smiling.
But there are exams. Okay. All right. So this thing about when does he leave? What's the timing?
Midnight.
Midnight. It's Great.
Sound familiar?
Exodus from Egypt, isn't that one? Isn't there link?
Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, right? And it was I'm pretty sure there's some other cases of that as well. It's the auspicious time to get things done. Again, I guess in Western culture, we say by the stroke of midnight. Yeah, it's also kind of a thing. Here, it doesn't necessarily mean midnight. It means in the middle of the night. Could it be that they fell asleep? Could it be that he just tricked them? I'd like to say he tricked them. But in any case, this is the story. Okay, anything else before we go on? Okay, John, would you like to read for us 4 to 7?
Had to turn my sound on. After that, he fell in love with a woman in the Wadi Sorek named Delilah. The lords of the Philistines went up to her and said, "Coax him and find out what makes him so strong and how we can overpower him, tie him up and make him helpless. And we'll each give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said, to Samson, "Tell me what makes you so strong, and how could you be tied up and made helpless?" Samson replied, "If I were to be tied with 7 fresh tendons that had not been dried, I should become as weak as an ordinary man."
All right, so let's break it down. The first interesting thing here, I think, is the word vayehov, right? That he fell in love with, right? He loved this woman. We didn't have that before with his wife. He's totally fallen for this. Remember the 3 to 4 pattern. The first encounter with his wife, the second encounter with his wife, there was a year in between. The woman here, the prostitute in Gaza, 3, and then the 4th will be the thing that does it. And we'll see that again as well in the scenes coming up. We're going to have 4 scenes of Samson being tied up. So they ask her to seduce him, to be their spy. There's 5 of them, the Sarnei, Plishtim, the lords of each of the 5 cities, and they'll each give 1,100. That's a lot of money. It's a ton of money to go to her, right? So again, is this realistic? Not real. I don't think it's about reality here. I think it's about the narrator wanting to say how badly they want to get her away. They want to get this guy tied up, right? It doesn't say overpower. It doesn't say they want to kill him. They want to tie him up. They want to neutralize this guy, right? Neutralize him without killing him. It seems at least at this point. Okay, and so the first of Samson go ahead and says, "Well, use some, tendons. That's how, for instance, the string of a bow and arrow, that's made out of tendons. And really, it's a good source for very strong string. And it's even stronger when it hasn't been dried, right? So take something this difficult for me and tie me up. I don't know that at the time, tie me up in this him and her context had any additional meaning as perhaps it would have in other cultures, but I wouldn't outrule it. And it was something very sexual about Samuel and about Samson and his relationships, especially this one with Delilah. The last thing I'll say, and this is at this junction, is that I like to look at the names, right? So Delilah is a tough one. Delilah is a tough one. It may be as simple as an ancient Assyrian name that has to do with one of the goddess dedicated to a goddess. But so nobody really knows. But in rabbinic lore, in the rabbinic tradition, the midrashic tradition, it comes from the word dal, which means poor or humbled. Delilah, the one who humbled Samson. She brought him to his knees. And that's one understanding. Yes, Ella?
Could it be Lila night?
So there are those that connect it with Lilith, right? Delilah, the one of night. But but what do you do with the Dalet? If this was Aramaic, the Dalet would be like Shel Laila, of the night. Perhaps, yeah, it's all possible. It's all possible. And the story here does seem to happen at night, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it's good as others. Somebody else?
Rabbi,
Yes.
the mention that he says, we'll each give you 1,100 shekels of silver. Now, maybe, does that mean that the Philistines used the same currency that the Israelites did? Or is this just the narrator just putting that out there and not caring?
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that the shekel is in a lot of Semitic languages. It's a lot in the entire area. And because the meaning also, it's been weighed out.
Yeah.
Shekel, it's been weighed. So it makes sense that it may be a generic term, or not generic, but one of those
Original thing.
pan-Semitic terms, right?
Yeah.
You'll remember we didn't get to it in Daniel yet, but the famous Rembrandt painting, right, has the word tikla, right? Tikla is taf, kuf lamed in Aramaic is shekel. So at least in the Aramaic of Daniel, it's also the same,
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Except that the Philistines were not Semitic, but maybe they had adopted the same.
Right. But on the other hand, what you said, your alternative is always the bottom line here. The story is told in the language that the people hearing it would understand.
Yeah. Okay.
The comment about the fact that the Philistines weren't Semitic, well, that's going to come up again from a religious point of view. So keep in mind of that. So why don't you go ahead and read the next section for us, Harold?
Okay. So the
8 or
Lord.
9.
So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh tendons that had not been dried. She bound him with them while an ambush was waiting in her room. Then she called out to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you, whereat he pulled the tendons apart as a strand of tow comes apart at the touch of fire. So the secret of his strength remained unknown.
Okay. So what's interesting here is that it's not that she went out and bought or had her servant bring it. It's actually, the 5 governors, right? The 5 chieftains came with themselves. They're bringing this stuff. It involves them in the story, makes the story even more comical in many ways, right? They were so, bent on getting this done. Or it could just mean that they had it brought for them, as we're going to see something similar about with Delilah in a few minutes. Okay, so he breaks through them. They're and what are they like? They're like a strand of tow. Now, a tow is not a word that I know, that I use. The word in Hebrew is rare. It's ptil hana'arat. Ptil means a cord, and na'arat, if I understand correctly, it's byproduct of when you're making flax. It's like the little stuff. Do you know, remember how etrogim used to come, those that grew up in traditional Jewish homes? Is that called horsehair or something? What it used to be wrapped, before it was wrapped in the plastic stuff we have. What was that called, Eileen? That stuff that,
It was like horsehair, like a mohair.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's lovely stuff. We never wanted to throw it out because like it's so cool.
Right.
There's nothing to do with it really. And
No.
only etrogim were something that I ever saw wrapped up, perhaps other precious fruits, but it was, I think, probably some sort of flax or something, you know. But it's one of those things, is a very, very, very flimsy kind of a cord, maybe like your hair even, and you don't even have to bring it to the flame, just as close to the flame and it melts it away, right? And that's the idea here, that it was, I don't know that there's really anything important about the fire here, because there is fire involved. A lot of the Samson stories, some people might say. To me, it's just one of these, it's like a lot of folk tales. There's going to be a number of steps. This was the first step, and it's going from kal, from easy, to hamur, to harder. So the first thing are these tendons, and he snaps them, no trouble. Okay. Harold, why don't you read another section for us?
Then Delilah said to Samson, "Oh, you deceived me. You lied to me. Do tell me now how you could be tied up." He said, "If I were to be bound with new ropes that had never been used, I would become as weak as an ordinary man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them while an ambush was waiting in a room. And she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he tore them off his arms like a thread.
Okay, so try number 2. This time the lords of the Philistines are not with her. She's doing it on her own. It's gone from something small to something greater. New ropes, not old ropes. You couldn't say they're afraid. And what's common to both of these attempts is that the men are lying in ambush to her, right? And what does that mean? Does it mean to kill him or just to catch him? And again, as we will see from the story, well, why don't we wait and we'll see from the story. Does it mean to kill him or to catch him? Okay. Who do we got? Wayne, would you like to read next section, 13, 14?
Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have been deceiving me all along. You have been lying to me. Tell me, how could you be tied up?" He answered her, "If you weave 7 locks of my own head into the web." And she pinned it with a peg and cried to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Awaking from his sleep, he pulled out the peg, the loom, and the web.
Now, if you are internally scratching your head and saying, I don't understand this, what just happened here? This is one of those cases I love to point out, because as I said to many of you have heard many times, I said that before I got to Hebrew University, I was always under the impression that when I was reading something in the Bible and I didn't get it, that it was on me, that I just was stupid, I didn't understand enough, right? And then when I got to Hebrew University, I understood there are things that don't make sense because there's multiple sources that contradict each other in the Torah. Or there's things, especially in the book of Samuel and in Judges here, where the text is corrupt. And here we have a really good case, and I apologize from a pedagogical point of view. I had a great opportunity to show something which is a little complicated, but I'm not going to show you. I'm just going to tell you what happened. The eye of the copier jumped from one word to the same word and wrote after it, and excluded and deleted an entire sentence. And how do we know? Because that entire sentence is found in the Greek, in the Septuagint. It's right there, and it doesn't make any sense that anybody would have added it, right? Although there are, I'm sure, commentaries, especially Orthodox commentaries, would say, oh, the Septuagint would have added it because, it didn't make sense. No, it makes sense this way. Basically, though, we learned that he had 7 locks. Now, what does it mean, 7 locks? It's not a strand, not a piece of hair, which I think we may use the term lock today, but think in terms, you see in the commentaries a lot about braids. I think in terms of something entirely different, rastot. How do you say rastas? How do you, dreadlocks? dreadlocks, especially people that have long hair, and not that are done in a hipster hair salon or a hippie hair salon, but just because people have long hair. Think of the time, if he really has long hair and he's a young man by now and he's never cut his hair, then it's grown into different kinds of, things and pieces. We've seen characters, seen them in person. So I think more in terms like seven, and seven is, in this case, is not only a typological number. We often have seven, but in this case, seven, and Koifman stresses this a lot, seven is a magical number as well in the ancient Near East. And so he's got these seven things, and if they were put in a weaving kind of apparatus with a peg, not a stake, but a peg, yated, with a peg in it, in such a way, there seems to be something magical. And before that, it was, tie me up like this, and it was something physical. Something small to something greater, from the string to the rope. Now it sounds like it's something more magical. Do this to my hair and I won't be strong. I won't be able to move. That's what it seems like here. But we have to kind of guess in some ways because the text is corrupt. Yes. Somebody wanted to say something? Okay. So that was the third attempt, and she's nagging. She's fetching. Oh, come on, don't you love me? We can imagine. I mean, this is a really famous scene, isn't it? There's so many biblical scenes. It's a famous. Well, David Friedman will tell you it's famous because of opera, right?
Yeah.
But me, never really having seen much opera, I'll tell you for me, it's famous because of the story here and because of learning it already, studying it in 8th grade in Hebrew high school. Or 9th grade, and afterwards at Hebrew University. But I think for many people, there's a movie, right? Is it Robert Goulet?
With Victor Mature.
Victor Mature, thank you.
And Hedy Lamarr.
Oh, there you go. Okay, and this is the thing. It's Samson died. Nobody remembers the jawbone, right? Nobody remembers the. Well, some people may remember the honey and the lion, but Israelis remember the honey and the lion because of what we talked about then, because it gave birth to a saying, may something sweet come out of something strong or difficult or awesome or bitter. That saying is something that brings people back to the biblical saying when it's in your spoken language. So it's interesting what we remember of things, right? Samson and Delilah is right up there with Cleopatra and Antony, right? And I guess to a certain degree because of the movies that were made. More than the fact that they're in the literature, but what do I know? Okay, and
Rabbi,
yes,
you've talked about him being a man-child. This is the third try. Was he just stupid?
no, I think he's toying with her. He's delighting. He's playing around with her. It's not that it really works. This is him being that immature kid who giggles to himself the jokes that only he knows, he understands, his insider jokes, just like he was the only one who knew the answer to the riddle, right? He knows he's playing with her. He's toying with her. He wants to hang out with her. This is his loving relationship that he's capable of. I mean, we could go into deep psychoanalysis here, and I'm influenced by how Zakovich reads this story, of course. But it's just, this is him delighting this little kid. I'm just messing with you, babe. But then comes after 3 times. So Wayne, why don't you read? Now comes the 4th time. Verses 15 to 17. Wayne, why don't you go read again?
Oh, he's muted.
All right, I got it. 15 to 17. Then she said to him, "How can you say you love me when you don't confide in me? This makes 3 times that you've deceived me and haven't told me what makes you so strong." Finally, after she nagged him and pressed him constantly, he was worried to death and confided everything to her. He said to her, "No razor has ever touched my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God since I was in my mother's womb. If my hair were cut, my strength would leave me, and I should become as weak as an ordinary man.
Okay, so what's the key? How does she get to him this time? If you really loved me, and that's how our story began. This story he fell in love. If you really love me, right? And how many times have we heard that or said that and played that despicable card when we're trying to manipulate somebody? Well, no, I'm sure many of you have never done it. I'm sure I've never done it, of course. From a language point of view, I like the first. My choice, my pick on this section is the first line. The first line, the words "Velibcha ein iti," which is literally, "and your heart is not with me," which has been translated, "when you don't confide in me," which of course the heart is used in different ways. For instance, in modern Hebrew, and also taken from more ancient Hebrew, when we want to tell somebody to pay attention, a warning, sim lev, put your heart. It literally put your heart. And so the heart being the seat of love, already in certain biblical passages, also the seat of attention, of intimacy. And so your heart is not with me. Very different than if we were to say today, for instance, put your heart into it, right? If we say put your heart into it now, we say give it more effort, right? So it's interesting. That's an interesting study unto itself, how we use the word heart in biblical Hebrew and onward in different languages. Okay. For all those that wanted and were just waiting for the best link to the opera of David and Samson and Delilah, I'm guessing that's what we have. We have David Friedman is put in for your listening, not now, later, for your viewing and listening enjoyment in the chat box. Okay.
This is Carlos.
I'm really upset about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Say that again, please, David.
About that. This is Mon cœur s'ouvre à ta voix, which is the great aria. Well, there are two of them, but this is My Heart Opens to Your Voice. And, this is the great love scene between them. And then the best part is actually the bacchanal, but we'll save that for the end.
Great. Okay. All right, then. Deb, are you up for reading today? Oh, I didn't mean to. I thought, okay.
So
Okay.
we're on 18 to 20?
18, 20, yeah. Yeah.
Are we on? Okay,
Eight-
so
1820.
sensing that he had confided everything to her. Right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Delilah sent for the lords of the Philistines with this everything to me, and the lords of the Philistines came up and brought the money with them. She lulled him to sleep on her lap. Then she called in a man, and she had him cut off the 7 locks of his head. Thus she weakened him and made him helpless. His strength slipped away from him. She cried, Samson, that he would break loose and shake himself free as he had the other times, for he did not know that the Lord had departed from him.
Okay, so a little difficult connection there, but I think everybody has the text in front of them. We could see the words ourselves, all the pieces. So because she has a feeling this is going to work, she brings in the audience, right? The guys that are paying for this, right? The ones who, the head of the CIA who's watching the operation halfway across the world, here she's bringing them in. It's going to happen now. And here's the case that I was talking about beforehand. What does it say? She lulled him to sleep on her lap. We'll talk about it. She called in a man, and the Hebrew says she called in a man and she cut off his hair, which of course is understood here by the translation, rightfully so. It's an idiom for if you're an important person, it says you're doing it, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing it. So it's as if she brought somebody special, the expert barber of Gaza came in and got this done. This is no, you don't leave this to anybody, right? You don't do this without expertise. But she puts him to sleep on her lap. Well, that's very nice, on her lap, and in the Hebrew it says vat yashena al birkeha, and she put him to sleep on her knees. But guess what the Septuagint has here in Greek? Between her legs.
Yeah, of course.
Between her legs. And I'll refer you back to when we saw that scene of Yael putting this tent stake through Sisra's head. Before that also, he fell, I'm sorry, it's not in that, it's in the poem, the Shirat Dvorah, the Song of Deborah in chapter 5. He fell between her legs. Yeah, and he kneeled between her legs. And this is a case in which Zakovich has a number of these examples from around the Hebrew Bible in which the text has been softened or sweetened. What's the word he uses?
Bowdlerized is the word that we use to.
What's the word, David?
Bowdlerized. It's sort of the Victorian, when the Victorians wanted you to not sort of read about it there, and that may have been the name of the censor or something, but it's bowdlerized.
So that's done already in the Masoretic text, according to I think a number of people. There's a few cases. The things that are most difficult are either they've been abruptly taken out, like what happens after Reuven sleeps with his stepmother, with one of his father's concubine, and then there's a break in the text. In the middle of the verse, there's a break in the tradition of writing a Torah scroll, which probably says there was a text there that of some curse of some sort or something that happened, but we don't have it. So from time to time, Zakovich calls it idun ha-text, which would probably be sensitizing. Sensitizing maybe would be a direct translation. Okay, so there it is, and he's awoke, right? He thinks he's going to break loose, but of course he's not free. And what is the reason that he's not free?
He gave him up.
What do you say, John? Why is he not free?
Lord left him.
Right, not because his hair was cut. Right, ostensibly that's what we're led to believe. That's what Delilah believes. That's what Shimshon believes. But the narrator knows better. And the narrator says it's not because his hair was cut, it's because the Lord departed from him. And in the instances beforehand in these stories where we were told that he was a great warrior and had great strength, it's because the Lord was upon him. The Lord blessed him with that. Now you could say in a Talmudic fashion, well, in the Habahatalia, the two things are connected to each other. God's blessing, special being with Samson, was manifested through the hair. And that was an oath that his mother took. And if he broke the oath, then boom, it broke. But the narrator doesn't go into that detail, does he? He simply wants to say that God decided no more, right? Until then, yes, but no more. Now, of all the things, the hair, you may be reminded of other things around the world. Gaster, in his book that I like to prepare with the mythology in the Old Testament and mythology, who's a disciple of Fraser and the folklorists, has a whole list of things that have to do with people's hair and their strength, their energy, magic in hair. I have to say that most of it is not relevant. That's why I think some people were at the time when I was in academia were not impressed with that book. It's still a good resource. I enjoy reading it and seeing what's out there, but it does seem that we can say from a human point of view, there's something about the hair that people recognize, right? We know about many cultures that hair is shorn as part of a purification ceremony or when a woman changes status. There are places around the world, or at least in history, where women who have taken vows, monastic vows, their heads have been shaved as well. You may know that in certain very, very narrow ultra-Orthodox circles of Hungarian Hasidim, there's a custom for women to shave their head when they get married. That has to do with not being God forbid, attractive to any other man, and also that there shouldn't be anything separating between their skin, their scalp, and when they go to the mikveh to purify themselves after their period. There's a lot of interesting things about hair. As a young boy who had long hair, and as an adult who had long hair, I get it. There's something very special about having long hair. You know, I had, many of you know, I had a ponytail for a long time. I mean, for 30 years, I don't know, a long time, most of my adult life. And then when I was going through a difficult time between being in Sweden and before I got the job here, I just went in and got it cut. And somebody said, well, oh my God, what happened? David, you cut your hair. It's like everybody around you gets done. And I said, what I said at the time was, you know, I feel helpless in my life right now. Nothing is going my way. I wasn't finding a job. I wasn't getting interviews. It was a real difficult time. I said, you know what? I got to take charge of something in my life. And besides, it's time to grow up. So that's what I said about getting a haircut in those days. But I understand what it's like. And when I was a teenager, I had long hair, and I remember going to the barber with my mother right when I turned 15, because I was going to Israel, and we knew that in Israel they didn't look kindly upon long-haired kids as much as they did in California, in Southern California. And I remember my mother crying. I could see my mother across. She'd driven me down to the place. She had a box, by the way. We gathered the hair. I mean, it was long. It was long hair, and she was in tears. And so I get it. I understand it. There's something magical, something mystical about hair, and I think that's what's being expressed here. I also think that probably many of the folkloristic stories from around the world were probably influenced somehow by Christian missionaries that got to places and brought these stories. Okay, so he's done for now, right? But what do they not do? They don't kill him. They don't kill him. So Sister Claire, if you could go on for us now.
The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and shackled him in bronze fetters, and he became a mill slave in the prison. After his hair was cut off, it began to grow back.
Okay, now that's like in a movie, right? In a movie where there's one scene where something starts, some magical thing starts to grow. We can imagine. That's the foreshadowing. Why do we care if it's growing back if we don't know? We know it's going to be involved. But so you know what we're going to do? We're going to skip over the post-biblical commentaries for now. If you skip on to the next page, and go to 23-24, Sister Claire, if you could continue reading.
Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon and to make merry. They chanted, "Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy Samson." When the people saw him, they sang praises to their God, chanting, "Our God has delivered into our hands the enemy who devastated our land and who slew so many of us."
Okay, so Harold, what I was talking about before, Dagon is a Canaanite entity and also a Philistine. But some say, like some you say the god of the harvest. Dagon is grain. In Ugaritic mythology, I'm pretty sure Dagon, or certain Canaanite mythologies, Dagon is the father of Baal. Baal is the chief honcho, the head honcho god, but he's the powerful one, and he's the god of fertility and of rain. But his father is the god of wheat. And you may know in Haifa, in the port of Haifa, anybody know? There's a huge building that has Daled Gimel Nun on it. It's a silo. I think it's silo. It's where they store grain. I guess that, I don't know, I assume it's being brought in from other places. We don't have all that much grain. I don't know, both directions. So Dagon is kind of the national granary, we could call it, in Israel. Okay, so they're reacting the same way that we would react. Hodu ladonai ki tov, right? Our enemies have been defeated. Give praise to the Lord, etc. Or in this case, give praise to Dagon. And go ahead and just finish off the last part for us.
As their spirits rose, they said, "Call Samson here and let him dance for us." Samson was fetched from the prison and he danced for them. Then they put him between the pillars. And Samson said to the boy who was leading him by the hand, "Let go of me, and let me feel the pillars that the temple rests upon, that I may lean on them." Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and there were some 3,000 men and women on the roof watching Samson dance.
Keep going. Next page.
Then Samson called to the Lord, "O Lord God, please remember me and give me strength just this once, O God, to take revenge of the Philistines, if only for one of my 2 eyes." He embraced the 2 middle pillars that the temple rested upon, one with his right arm and one with his left, and leaned against them. Samson cried, "Let me die with the Philistines," and he pulled with all his might. The temple came crashing down on the lords and on all the people in it. Those who were slain by him as he died outnumbered those who had been slain by him when he lived. His brothers and all his father's household came down and carried him up and buried him in the tomb of his father Manoah between Zorah and Eshtaol. He had led Israel for 20 years.
Okay. Now, we'd already heard he'd led them for 20 years beforehand, and seems like perhaps this is a different tradition added on, but we get this story though. We understand the story is well structured, even down to the building up of tension when they say, for instance, show me the pillars. He touches the pillars, and then it takes a break, and there were many men and women there, with the thousands there, and they're all watching him, and he's dancing, and just very, very, building up to it. And we already know what was going to happen, and something kind of glorious about it, right? Except for he's committing suicide, which may be a problem as well. But his eyes are gouged out. And so let's go back to the bottom of the second page. Sorry to do this to you, to the back and forth, to look at some rabbinic writings now that will kind of fill in our gaps. I'll understand if people have to leave at 12, but I think we'll go on for another few minutes to get this done. You've got these sources yourselves, but I think we'll go on to the next part when we meet next week. Dan, why don't you read for us, Dan Stork Mechilta, which is an early rabbinic midrash.
Yes. Come on in.
And you also find, in the case of Samson, that by means of the very thing with which he acted proudly before God, God punished him. For it says, and Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is pleasing to my eyes." What is written down afterwards? And the Philistines laid hold on him and put out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza. Rabbi Yehuda says, his misconduct first began in Gaza. Therefore, he was punished only in Gaza.
So there's actually a debate going on, a machloket. The Tana Kama, that is the first person, the first speaker in tradition who is anonymous here, or the text itself says, why was he punished by having his eyes gouged up? Midah neged midah, tit for tat, right? Because he misused his eyes by seeing that woman, says, "Get her for me," right? So rather simplistic, but this is in a long line of midah neged midah, of a tit for tat kind of a measure for measure things in this rabbinic tradition here. There's other examples from biblical literature. On the other hand, Rabbi Yehuda says he wants to say something else. It's not an exact debate. It doesn't say, why was he punished in Gaza? It's actually, this is not a machloket. This is a different way of looking at the same thing. It's not a debate. He was punished in Gaza because that's where his misconduct first began. And what was his misconduct there? Going to a prostitute. Okay.
Right.
All right. So it's their ways of teaching other lessons about, for instance, the rabbi who said, stop staring at those women and lusting after those women with your eyes, or be careful going to the same place, where you go, you're going to get payback in the same place. All right. We go on now to the top of the third page, to a passage from the Talmud. And this is a difficult one. And he became a mill slave in the prison, right? They had him pushing you can imagine the
Grindstone.
mill, right? The grindstone. And he's, instead of two oxen, going around in a circle, they've got him pushing it himself, right? This making a mockery of this huge man, this hero, which contradicts itself a little bit, because if he was being pushed around already, it sounds like he's being he still has superpowers, although they've been taken away from him. But don't let that bother you, okay? Especially if you want to learn what this says. Rabbi Yochanan said, what is milling, the word tochen, from the word tochen, what does it mean? It's just a euphemism for sexual misconduct. And from this, we learn that each and every one of the Philistines would bring their wives to him, to the prison, so that they might become pregnant from him, and therefore give birth to an entire generation of superheroes, of little superheroes. He became a stud, right? He became, this is really degrading, isn't it? And what I left out was the proof text. There is a proof text here from the book of Job, where Job uses the word, and other men will be doing my wife. We would say today, doing my wife, sticking it to my, all those kinds of languages we would use. There, the root tachan is being used. Okay. And now we get to something from the 20th century. And I mentioned this before, and there's an entire book by Jabotinsky, who was the father of the revisionist approach to Zionism. He was the philosophical teacher of Menachem Begin, of Yitzhak Shamir. I don't know that I would say necessarily Bibi Netanyahu. I don't think that Bibi really went on in the same ideology. I think Bibi was much more about himself than the ideology itself. But it's a well-known relative minority compared to the other views of Zionism that kind of won the day. The Jabotinskyites, or the revisionists, were blacklisted and shunned. Talk about boycotting, right? These Jews, these Israelis, these Zionists were blacklisted from Israel in Israel in the late 40s, early 50s. Many of them left the country. Some of them were, the only thing they could do were things like to become a spy, and that was what Yitzhak Shamir did. These were people that were in the Etzel, in the Lehi, and I know I have a friend whose parents moved to Israel in the 50s because they couldn't get jobs, because they were Jabotinskyites. And there's that side of this as well. Canceling is not a new thing, and ice cream is certainly not the most significant of boycotts. Okay, so in this, and now here's the interesting thing. This is a novel. It's a novella, right? It's a novel. It's a historical novel about Samson. And you'd think that we would hear about this, right? It's Jabotinsky. It was at the time in very few lives. Since then, it was reprinted. But in the 80s, when I found out about this from an article in the Encyclopedia Judaica on Samson. I was looking for bibliography. And I said, where's this book? I found one copy in all of the Hebrew University collection, one battered copy of this. Turns out the book had been blacklisted as well. So really, really interesting. And so I read it with glee, and it's very by the way, it's like in 20 languages. It's in 7 languages. It's in many, many different languages. I think it was originally written in German. The second person, and he constructs a new reality, new scenes here. The second person to visit Samson was Hermesh, the very same Hermesh who once was one of Samson's foxes. All right, this is a part of the book here. His elite unit. He brought sad news, things that Samson had never imagined would happen. The Philistines would no longer speak within the earshot about these things, that is to Samson, and he had the naive impression that the land was quiet and that the conquerors had forgotten about Dan and Yehudah. But no, they were back to demanding from the people of Tzorah, where he's from, that they pay tribute. And others came, armed guards who surprise searched all the homes looking for iron. And even though they could have easily been overpowered and killed, no one dared. No one even spoke out. And you can feel Jabotinsky writing about a particular historical reality. This is pre-Holocaust, but the situation of Jews being searched and tormented by wherever they were living, at least in Eastern Central Europe. For a long while, Chamesh waited in an embarrassing silence and then finally asked, shall I pass on any message from you? Oh, great Samson, our warrior, our commander who I've come to visit, even though you've been totally ruined by being, being ridiculed and blinded. Samson thought for a while and then said slowly, 2 things you must tell them for me. 2 words. The first is iron. They should stockpile iron. They should buy iron at any price, spending all their money, their grain, their oil, their wine, their flocks, their wives, and their children. All should be exchanged for iron. Nothing in the world is more valuable than iron. Will you pass that on? I will pass it on. This they will understand. They will not yet understand the second word, says Samson, but they must eventually do so, and soon will come the day. The second word is king. Proclaim to Dan and Benjamin, say to the ears of Yehudah and Ephraim, king, one man shall give the sign, and thousands will at one time raise up their fists. This is how the Philistines conquered Canaan. Proclaim this message in all the land. King, I will proclaim, said Chamesh. Then go forth, my son, says Samson. Very dramatic scene, and you understand, you get Jabotinsky's worldview. The Jews need iron and a king. You need to be armed and you need to have political power. All right, this is pre-statehood. This is a form of Zionism known as revisionist Zionism. And if you grew up in Beitar, which I didn't, but some people did, you knew this. They knew this stuff, the iron, the king, they knew this kind of thing. And this is a really good, we haven't talked yet today about, but we have to mention now, this is a really good window into Israeli politics, right? And at all levels, not just the right, the left as well. Everybody understood at some point you need to have a political entity. At some point they understood, not always. And you need to have a military. You need to have a way of defending yourself. It's not by chance that the Israeli army is called the Israeli Defense Forces. That's how we try to present it to ourselves. And yes, it could be that we're one of the most moral armies in the world. I don't know that to be true, but at least that's what Israelis like to say. And this is how Jabotinsky wrote a modern midrash to the ancient tale of Samson. I love it. I love it for what it is. I love it for the phenomenology.
Wow.
And if you indulge me, just 2 more we'll go to the end of the second page. I'll just mention that in the New Testament, Samson, at least in Hebrews 11:32, is listed with other heroes. There's no criticism whatsoever. Although I did see something, I think from one of the church fathers, and I saw it in passing, I don't remember what it was, I didn't look it up, is that the difference between Samson and Jesus was that Samson died to kill, and Jesus died so that others would live, which is an interesting thing to explore where that came from exactly. It could have been a modern Christian author as well. In any case, going back to the time of the New Testament, to Josephus, and the man deserves special mention. This is Samson, due to his strength and heroism. Remember, Josephus is a soldier, and he sees things through a soldier's eyes, as well as his greatness of spirit at the time of his death, and his rage at his enemies until his death. Yes, you should die well. Die by, he's like a Klingon here, right? By taking out the enemy.
Yeah.
And that fact that he was ensnared by a woman should be attributed to the fact that he was only human and that sin got the better part of him. Still, one must make note of the excellence in which he carried himself in every other matter. You got to love that, right? Yeah, he was a womanizer. Yeah, he was a skirt tip, but don't let that buck get in your way. The most important thing was he was a great warrior. And finally, Rabbi David Kimchi of France, 13th, 14th century. And one might ask, if the Creator commanded that he should be a holy person, and this goes to what you asked in the beginning, Eileen, if the Creator commanded that he should be, and also to what you said, Nancy, if the Creator commanded that he should be a holy person even before he was born, how could he have become impure with the daughters of the Philistines? It seems fit to answer that the women he took for himself in Timnah and Gaza, that is Timna, the woman he was with twice, right? And Gaza, the prostitute, and Nachal Sorek, that is Delilah, were first converted by him and thus brought into the religion of Israel. He didn't touch the prostitute until he sent her to school. He taught her Hebrew, how to daven, everything else. She went to the mikveh, right? I'm of course, going through the act of conversion to Judaism. But for Rabbi David Kimchi, who is a traditionalist, in medieval rabbi, he can't imagine how if Shimshon was a transgressor, was a sinner, we can, but he can't imagine, then why does he get such play? Why does he get so many chapters, you know? Finally, how could we otherwise, God forbid, think of an Israelite judge and savior of the people would actually marry a Philistine, thereby transgressing with what is written in the Torah? And that, of course, is, in a nutshell, what I was able to deconstruct in my first year at Hebrew University in 1982. How do you get from Kimchi's view to the view, well, it developed over the years, but the way that I tried to present this lovely, lovely, delightful saga of Samson today. Questions or comments?
This is excellent. I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I think I know why I need glasses.
Be careful. Susie's right next to you. You know, be careful what you divulge.
She knows.
Okay. All right, John and Wayne and Claire, was this difficult, or is this along the lines of what you've been thinking and reading in recent years?
One point that I don't think we've mentioned is that trying to explain why someone with all the obvious faults was still his hero. God can give power to whomever he wants. God can interfere in our lives. We don't have to know all the answers. It's part of a traditional Christian answer to some of these mysterious things that you say, I wonder why in the world this could happen the way it did. But we're not God.
So my reply to that would be maybe this, and I forgot really to mention this. What's the bottom line of this story, in my opinion? It's when Samson says, oh, now I get it. God, give me that one last time. And that really only makes sense. It's only dramatic. It's only really, really compelling if he is such a zlob, if he is such a sinner, right? A womanizer and totally ignoring. And that the only thing that he remembers from his Nazarite is the hair, right? The most superfluous thing, or the superficial thing. Wayne, any comments?
I just wanted to, I was surprised I always thought of Jabotinsky as being a political leader and influencing Menachem Begin and so on, but I never knew of him being as a Torah scholar.
Yeah, very much so. I if not a Torah scholar, certainly an extreme, a contributor to Jewish culture. Yeah, but he was a Luftmensch. He was a very, very cultured person, I think. But Wayne, I was asking if do you have any particular comments from your viewpoint on this story?
Well, you know, mine comes from hearing all of it from a Christian standpoint, and this is makes everything so much more clear, and it's great. He wasn't the hero in my mind that so many thought he was, and Robert Mature really screwed up with the whole thing. All
right, Sister Claire.
I agree with Wayne. I mean, I think in Christianity we have this image of Samson as this super big hero, and now we're seeing kind of another side to him through a text like this that actually we don't pay that much attention to. So it's really interesting to see.
Nancy?
In the Christian world, they don't even want to talk about things like this. They want to gloss over it and say, that's the way it is, that's the way it was, and if you don't believe it, that's tough. This is how it happened.
Oh, so Bill, let's just quantify that by saying that not in all the Christian world, there are plenty of intellectual Bible studying Christian worlds as well. Yes, Nancy?
Yeah.
Doesn't this, in some ways, though it's all through Torah that we have, I remember one Jewish commentator saying there are no heroes in Judaism, in the sense we have no perfect people. Everyone in Torah, no matter how good they are, be it Moses or Abraham and then Jacob, these people have their moments. They are human beings and they're flawed and they mess up. And Jacob on his deathbed looks back at his life and clearly he's very disappointed in himself in many ways. And our matriarch, Rahel, not necessarily a totally admirable person. So I think that's one of the things that's very significant about Judaism is how ordinary human beings, it is a paradigm. We don't have to have these supernatural heroes. We don't have to have people that God is playing like chess with, and you go here and you go there. But God is with these people, and at various stages of their life, they know more about God, and that informs them.
Okay, so I'll just pass on to you something I've said over the years to the people that we've been together, is that that is what one hears quite often, that the Bible is filled with flawed figures. My teacher Zakovich would argue that for every flawed figure, for every story about a problematic situation, you can find the outcome comes to explain a particular outcome. So he sees it a little bit differently. So for instance, if David is a flawed person, David's a very flawed person, it's not that, we still look up to him. Anyway, that Jewish tradition says that, but in his biblical criticism, Zakovich would say, well, that explains why the house of David in the end did fall. It may be promised, but not around.
I see that too. I didn't mean to imply that we look up to them because they're flawed. I'm sorry if I gave that impression.
No.
I think that's exactly what is significant about Judaism, that we see a person and with a lot of flaws, but also still being godly, and also their flaws can lead them into better situations or better things, or their flaws can result in the whole structure falling down.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I will also mention that in the Gospels, Jesus is not always the most pleasant of characters. At least that's how I read in the simple. So it's, at least in that, relative of Jewish literature, Matthew probably Jewish literature, but maybe the others adjacent. So I those are interesting things to say, to study in general about heroes, but I hope we've done some justice to Samson, our little sun god.
Yeah.
And how he was adopted into the biblical tradition. And we get to some pretty nasty stuff coming up. So gird your loins, and we'll meet together next week, okay?
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.